Our guest today is Iona Miller. Iona is a certified hypnotherapist and writer. She has combined her experience in clinical therapy with years of training in Jungian psychology, science, and the mystic arts to bring a unique slant to her therapeutic, written, and graphic work. In the forthcoming issue of Paranoia, the Conspiracy Reader, Iona has an article therein entitled Tom Bearden 0.0, Wizard of 0 Point. If all of this wasn't enough, apparently Iona is somehow involved with the intelligence community. How, I'm not exactly sure, but I'll do my darndest to find out today. So here she is without further ado, Iona Miller. Hello, Iona.
Hi, Adam. Greetings to you, and good to be talking with you again.
Yeah, very nice to hear your voice again.
I might describe my current intelligence capacity as somewhat of a spy whisperer.
A spy whisperer.
Mm-hmm.
Is that like a horse whisperer?
Yes, only applied to intelligence personnel somewhat in a consulting capacity.
Well, how does that work? Let me ask you, the last time you visited us, I billed you as a performance artist for the CIA, as you had listed yourself as such on your website, and so one of the reasons I indeed invited you back today was to find out exactly what you mean when you said you were a performance artist for the CIA and also a sort of spook whisperer?
Spy whisperer.
Okay.
Well, that's a tall order. This sort of evolved from our subject today, Mankind Research Unlimited, led me into associations with a number of people in the intelligence community, both in science intelligence and in intelligence and counterintelligence. And one of the people that I'm working with is a former case officer for CIA. And of course I also do online performance art, so I was making a joke, but I think that last time I said to you, aren't we all performance artists for CIA? In some, twisted sense.
Mm-hmm. And talk a bit, if you would, before we bring on our other guest, and I'll let you introduce him. I believe we have him on the line, about this group, MRU, which is Mankind Research Unlimited, who I guess were a sort of East Coast version of SRA, the Stanford Research Institute, that was involved in remote viewing and other forms of psychic research in the 70s at the behest of certain alphabet intelligence agencies. Could you speak about this group and all the types of things you were involved in, and who were some of the principal players?
Well, MRU was a little spookier than SRI in that it kind of operated under the radar, and it never really sought or got the kind of publicity that SRI did, because SRI did many projects that were not related to the paranormal as well. MRU was directed by Dr. Carl Schleicher, who had a background in intelligence and was got a pretty serious interest in the paranormal. And back in these days, in the early 70s, there were so many things floating around to investigate in terms of alternatives that he was just willing to check them all out and leave no stone unturned in that regard. Mm-hmm. He was involved in the translation of some materials that produced Ostrander and Schroeder's Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain.
Yes.
Which is probably one of the books that led a lot of people into parapsychology early on. And there were many other associates there as well, Dr. Chris Bird and Dr. Eldon Bird, and, kind of a cast of thousands. It's sort of a roster of who's who in that arena.
Was there a crossover with SRI?
Not to my knowledge. I don't think there was a direct crossover, and Carl himself refused to ever admit that he was working directly for CIA, and I have been able to find no evidence to show that that's a fact at all, but I do have some evidence and testimony to show that he was linked to Naval Intelligence and NSA.
Mm-hmm. Well, naval intelligence was one of the key players, it's been alleged, in mind control, and in an email you referred to this Dr. Karl Schleicher as the real cigarette man and the father of the Manchurian Candidate. Certainly these types of activities extend beyond the typical psychic experiments, that SRI was involved in, and into human experimentation of the darkest kind.
Well, possibly, but that link is not solid. The allegation that he was the father of the cyborg or Manchurian Candidate was made by A.J. Weberman when he kind of outed Carl and MRU in the Covert Intelligence Bulletin in 1980.
Okay.
This was after the Senate hearings on MK-Ultra in 1977. And so he alleges that, and Carl certainly had those interests and capacities, let's say. But whether he was actually involved, there's no direct link that I've been able to establish.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the cigarette man, he's just a perfect candidate and almost a dead ringer lookalike.
What were some of the allegations that A.J. Weberman made, and what did he base these on?
Well, he based them on the fact that he had finagled getting into the office of MRU.
Of course, he was a famous garbologist, A.J. Weberman.
Yes, a famous garbologist. He dug around the garbage of Bob Dylan and was able to make, deductions based on that.
Yeah, and some of them, admittedly, were pretty far out.
Yeah. And what he did is he got this entree to the office, and he asked if they could spend the night there, and I guess what he must have done was just rummage around and find some materials that he used to compile his story from. Most of them are just the takeaway brochures for the agency and what the interests and applications were. And so I think he did a little more research on that as well, but it's hard to say. That's one reason I was trying to ferret out for myself the truth from the, wild allegations of what that was by talking with people who were from MRU.
Yeah.
Now, let me just say that my first introduction to this came in the early 70s because my now ex-husband, Richard Allen Miller, had been the Northwest Regional Director for MRU and had conducted studies in Kirlian photography and psychic surgery and some work with Dr. Hiroshi Motoyama on psychokinesis. So, I had the inside track on it from the beginning, and
right.
He and I are still involved in an organization called OAK, Organization for the Advancement of Knowledge, that's still pursuing some of this, what's generally called blue sky research.
Mm-hmm.
Science intelligence when it's applied, to those sorts of things.
How was MRU funded?
Not very well, apparently.
That's the question that comes to mind. When you look at SRI, you could trace the funding to the certain
$13 million.
Branches. Yeah.
Well, I can categorically say MRU never enjoyed that kind of largesse.
Okay.
And was, you might just say marginal at best, sometimes better than others. But because of that, I think that's additional proof that no massive government contracts were awarded there.
Now,
Carl pursued things based on his own resources.
Mm-hmm. We have on the line, I believe, a fellow who is the Deputy Director of Mankind Research Unlimited, MRU. Would you like to introduce him?
Charles Stone was actually the Deputy Director, I believe, of Mankind Research Foundation, which followed MRU. And, he has his own tale to tell. The interesting thing about talking to people from MRU is that they all have a different story, and so perhaps he'd like to introduce himself and tell what his is. When you originally invited me on, you asked me to talk about these spooks and science intelligence people, and I thought it would be much more effective to have them speak for themselves. So, Charles, would you like to introduce yourself?
That's right. I'm calling right here from Washington, D.C., and my office on Pennsylvania Avenue. And I have about 7 blocks in the White House, and I do a lot of different things. Some of them started with when I worked with Mankind Research Unlimited, and it was actually my first job in Washington as Carl's deputy. And at that time, Carl had a small townhouse in Silver Spring at a great location that he carried on all these activities that he'd started in a much bigger facility that he had in Kalorama Road in the Embassy District. And that's when he was much better, when he was funded on a larger scale. But Carl was carrying on many types of activities and many projects to try to make the world a better place, and he was doing it in, like Frank Sinatra said, I think, doing it his way or whatever, and that was Carl's way of doing things. And Carl was a very smart man, and he was, well-intentioned to try to save the world, but he was often not the best person in dealing with people, though.
What were some of the experiments he was involved with?
Well, let me just tell you some of the main programs that why I was brought in. I have a background as a biomedical scientist, and my sponsoring graduate school was one of the founders of some of the major units at NIH and so forth. And he was involved. He had several projects for AIDS, drug and alcohol abuse. He had some of these advanced learning projects and so forth. He had many projects for affordable housing, and then he had several smaller organizations that he ran along with MRU that were on the door of the when you came in the office. And I don't want to get into too many names mentioned here to confuse things, but there are a number of alternative therapies that do work for AIDS and that could be used to treat from that time in the late 1980s that we tried to popularize with the federal government. There are also some other approaches that many people have worked on to try to get the government interested for cancer therapy and so forth. Had the effort been made to develop these going back into the 1930s, that there would be much more effective and cheaper therapies available for not only cancer but probably other types of medical conditions.
If I could interject, one of those was blood irradiation.
Yes, one was blood irradiation, but there are many other ones that go back to what came from radionics and so forth from that period of time. If those had been allowed to develop, we would have many more types of therapies that would be kind of strange to our minds these days, but had they been allowed to develop, we would have had many types of therapies available for not only AIDS and cancer and other lethal ailments. We also had electronic means that are used for drug and alcohol abuse. Of course, at that time in the late 80s, the drug wave was killing the country, and people were, in terms of crime, in terms of people who were using drugs, people who were involved in drug trade, and so forth. The whole picture was bad for the country, and we had a way of treating most people who were drug addicts, except the most severe types. I'd say at least 90% of the people can be treated electronically. This has been done on a large scale in China, especially in Hong Kong, for years, where heroin abuse is endemic in China, and this could have been used in the United States much earlier and could have stopped many of the problems that we've had over the years. So those are several of the major approaches, projects that we're working on. We had a lot of them, and again,
biofeedback was the application.
Well, there was the biofeedback was not. That was not one of his main programs at that time that he was working on. When I worked with him, he worked with a gentleman from that came over here from Russia with his alternative learning techniques and so forth, and he'd worked with the ladies who had written the book. You mentioned Miss Ostrander and her partner and so forth. And I met and worked with both those people. We The head of the International Psychotronic Association is another area which Carl was very prominent in, was the psychotronic field.